Welcome to Educators Not Robots, the podcast that humanizes the educational experience. Today we're introducing Linda Peña, known by her students as Ms Pea. Ms Peña has been a teacher for 7 years and teaches 7th grade science and 7th grade AVID at Sylvan Middle School in Citrus Heights, California. She earned her Bachelor in Science and Nutrition Science at UC Davis, her single-subject teaching credential and B-Clad in Spanish at Sacramento State University, and her Master of Educational Entrepreneurship at the University of Pacific. Ms. Peña is a Stockton native and is passionate about her job as an educator, especially as an AVID coordinator, as she herself had benefited from the AVID program when she was a student in the K-12 system. Welcome to Educators Not Robots, the podcast that humanizes the educational experience. Today we're introducing Linda Peña, known by her students as Ms Peña. Ms Peña has been a teacher for 7 years and teaches 7th grade science and 7th grade AVID at Sylvan Middle School in Citrus Heights, California. She earned her Bachelor in Science and Nutrition Science at UC Davis, her single-subject teaching credential and B-Clad in Spanish at Sacramento State University, and her Master of Educational Entrepreneurship at the University of Pacific. Ms. Peña is a Stockton native and is passionate about her job as an educator, especially as an AVID coordinator, as she herself had benefited from the AVID program when she was a student in the K-12 system. Linda Peña is here with us, and we kind of started the conversation without all of you listening, but you are a middle school science teacher at what school again?
Sylvan Middle School in San Juan Unified.
Sylvan Middle School, and you also are an AVID teacher.
Yes.
You're the lead for AVID, correct, at your site, if I remember correctly?
Yes. So I'm the AVID coordinator at my site, and I also teach AVID.
And my favorite stories that we have to get to at some point, you also teach sex education.
Yeah.
Those are the best stories.
Of course.
My favorite part. It's my favorite part of the year.
Yes. To middle schoolers.
Gross. Yeah.
So what we were about to ask, and I didn't want to miss it though, how did you get started into teaching?
Okay, so initially growing up, I always wanted to be in the medical field. I wanted to be either a doctor or a pharmacist. I was always fascinated. I always loved science. I just didn't, I always thought I wanted to use my science knowledge into put it into medicine. But then I realized in college, I didn't want to do that. And I wanted to be a teacher. After I did an internship, my junior year of college, at a middle school in Davis. And I figured out, I think I want to be a teacher after that experience. So it just came out of nowhere. And then the next year I applied for the teaching credential program. So I didn't want to be a teacher for the longest time. I always thought that profession was very, you always heard stories that teachers wouldn't get paid enough. Teachers would always, you would hear all these stories about, parents didn't like teachers, students didn't like teachers. They were so they weren't appreciated in our society. So I didn't want to be a teacher. I never thought of it, even though now that I think back and now that, even when I mention it to my friends and my family, they always say, oh no, I think you did want to be a teacher, but none of us realized it. Like I was always the kid that had the highlighters, that had the color pencils, that had all my supplies. Yeah. Even before I was an AVID student, I had all my supplies. And so they're and I would, in the summertime, I would also teach my brothers. Like I would have my old workbooks from school and I would use the pages that I didn't use in class and I would teach them those things.
That's super cute. How old were you when you were doing that?
I don't know, maybe 8 or 9. Yeah, maybe 8 or 9 years old. And I would I love doing that. Every workbook, all the kids would throw the workbooks away at the end of the year. I would hold on to them and I would use them.
That is super cute.
As you've been talking about it, and in our previous conversation too, it's really apparent that you actually love your job. You seem to have a lot of enthusiasm about it. So I
do. I love my job. And I feel like I love it. I feel like I appreciate it more now during the pandemic than before. Wow. I feel like now that, I've been teaching online on Zoom for like 2 weeks now, and just looking at the kids like little faces and stuff, and like they're so willing to learn even from home. Like that excites me. Just like watching them in the screen, at least, like it's a different experience than just doing asynchronous teaching and just like, oh, here's your assignment, work on it. Like I just love looking at their little faces, hearing their voices.
That is true. I feel like I definitely, because I have to teach online too, and you do, like you're only looking at their faces, and that's not something you do in the classroom. You're kind of just glancing at the whole room. You don't, unless a student's doing something wrong or doing something really right, you're not looking at an individual student. And now though, you have to see their face and you see their expressions. And I have my kids do some independent work, but some of them stay online with me. And I joke with them on the chat. I'll send these little chats because they leave their cameras on while they're working, and you could just see their little furrowed brows, and like they're like, I could see they're reading on the screen, and they've got tabs going because the reflection in their eyes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys look like academics right now. Like, look at you. And then they turn their cameras off, so I had to stop saying that.
Yeah. Oh, and I've seen so many babies, so many pets.
Oh yeah.
Like they want to tell me everything. They want to show me everything, and then I keep the chat on. I keep all these different things on. I communicate with them through Remind too, the app. So they could, if they don't feel comfortable, chatting there or asking questions, they could, message me or whatever. But it's just so nice that they reach out more than ever, more than when I was in school with them.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, you're a guest in their home, and they're a guest in yours, and some of the barrier of being in person is removed, and maybe that lets people come out of their shell a little bit, so you get to see a different, and you get to see them in a different light, and they can present themselves in a different light. So it's definitely, I think, it's a good experience for everybody.
I want to go back to that internship. So tell us a little more, like, what was it about that internship you did that had you have a change of heart?
So at first so the reason why I did this internship, and I was telling Anthony this, a while back too, was because I was taking 11 units, and I needed one more unit to get financial aid. So I went to UC Davis, and I just needed one more unit to get, full financial aid. And in my biology class, a person from the teaching credential program, went and was like a guest speaker and talked about their program that they had. I don't remember what it was called. But it was basically interning at a middle school. You could get 1 unit or 2, I think, pass, no pass. And I just thought, oh, perfect. I'll just go there. That's like my escape. I'll be able to get financial aid. So I did that. So the first couple of weeks, I would just sit back and just observe. I observed how the teacher interacted with the students, how the students interacted with the teacher. And then slowly, the teacher started saying, okay, why don't you go and help out this group? Or why don't you go and, do this, do that, like help me set up the lab or help me do that. But it was just slowly. I didn't really get to teach like a full lesson, never. But it was just like I was getting little bits and pieces, and that kind of helped me realize, I think I could really see myself doing this in the future, doing this for a living. Like I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't get tired of this. I think what captured my attention the most about teaching was that every day was different. There's no day that's the same. And I think with other jobs, every day for the most part is the same.
Yeah.
With teaching, the kids have good days, bad days. And sometimes even though you might have the best lesson planned, you have to modify and change stuff. And I think that's what I like the most about teaching. You also have a lot of flexibility as a teacher. You decide how you want to teach, how you want to approach things. There's just so many different things that captured my attention. And then, so after that program, then I decided to apply. I applied to the UC Davis teaching credential program. I got into that one too. And then I got into the Sac State one, and I decided to do the Sac State over the UC Davis, just so that I could see a different group of kids. I felt like in Davis, I got to see a very privileged side of science. I saw that, a lot of the kids, they had, it just fascinated me because a lot of the kids they had all this lab equipment, And, growing up, when I was growing up, I didn't really have that. Like, I was always a child, in middle school, my science teacher didn't trust the whole class to do experiments. They would only trust me. And I even got like a medal at the end of the year from the teacher saying, "Oh, here's a medal for you." Like, he would trust me with scalpels and everything, and the rest of the class was just doing book work. But then you got to see this side in Davis where the kids were working. I remember one time they were working on rockets. They were given like little kits, like actual little kits. In other schools, like in Title I schools, you tell the kids, okay, we need a 2-liter bottle. You need to bring, get some cardboard. You're going to make your fins. Like, they had everything. They didn't need that. They had everything. They even had stickers to decorate the rocket.
Yeah.
And I was, like, they had so much stuff. So when I did my credential, I decided to do the Sac State one just so that I could be placed in a Title I school, placed in the school, more like a real life scenario, not just, like a privileged school, to get another perspective. And I think it worked out for the best.
Was there any moments when you started working in the classroom as a student that really like stand out to you? Like any special moments with students?
I think the first moment probably was when I got it was like a teacher of the year thing, and like students wrote down like their favorite teacher and why they're nominating their teacher, and I got like all these letters. It was like my second year of teaching. And so then I was like, oh, like I guess it's making a difference in the kids' lives. Like, because before you would hear the kids say, oh, thank you, but you didn't really, like, I felt appreciated, but I wasn't really sure. They were just being polite. But then when I read the letters, I was like, oh, like they, and they were specific about, specific moments that I made a difference in their life. Then that's when I started realizing, oh, like this is for real. So it's not fake.
The former belief that the students don't disrespect their teachers all the time definitely squashed when you start getting those little thank you letters.
Yeah, when you get little letters, like I think a lot of people think, oh, teachers just want, they want little presents during Christmas time or, during Valentine's Day. No, like I think a teacher just appreciates like a little note from the student saying, thank you for being my teacher, or thank you for showing me how to do this. And, like small things like that.
Isn't it crazy how it can like change the whole thing? Like we always talk about it. It's become kind of cliche, but it's so true. Like you could have a whole week of disaster and having to modify and be on your toes. And you're like, Friday comes and you're like, why am I doing this? I should just get a new job. And then on Friday, one kid is just like, you're all right. You're my favorite teacher. And then they walk out and you're just like, it's all worth it. It's like,
there's little moments like that. There's little moments like that where, I would have a bad, like, I'll give you an example. Like, it's hard to pinpoint them because they always happen. Mm-hmm. Like right when I'm just like so sad about it, like it always happens. Like I might have like a super bad period where, a kid was disrespectful and called me the B word or whatever. And so I had to write a referral. And then in that same class, you have a kid that says, oh, Ms. Peña, can I help you put the Chromebooks back? Can I plug this in? Thank you for doing that for me. In the same period, I'm like, you know what? I have to keep on going. Like I can't I can't just let that moment, ruin my day. But it's so weird how things balance out.
So you got the teacher recognition as teacher of the year during your second year of teaching?
Yes. And
you've been teaching for 5 years?
This is my start of my 7th year.
Oh, so you've been an AVID coordinator for 5 years, but teaching for 7. Okay, all right. Have you ever heard of like the 5-year like slump? Or Rosie was telling me how like a lot of teachers at around 5 years they kind of either quit or they commit. You know what I'm saying? That's like the 5-year mark.
Yes.
Did you see that in your school?
Usually, like 3 years. That's what I heard. 3 years. The third year, 5th year. Yeah, that's common. A lot of teachers just drop out after they realize, look, do I really want to do this? Yeah, like you see it everywhere. Like people start, they have, and I feel like the best teachers are the ones that burn out the fastest because they have all these great ideas and they want to make a change, but they can't make a change because the system is so antiquated and everything is so everyone's so set in their ways. And I think they get frustrated. And so they quit before they even see any change.
Wow.
Before they even have the opportunity to see anything. They just give up.
I feel like that's such an important thing for people to understand, that the best teachers are the ones who get the most burnt out. Like, that is like, when you really want to do your best and you put your energy into it, and then you're putting your energy, it's like a Sisyphus type thing. Like, you're putting all this energy to push this boulder, and then it just falls down the other side again, and you're just running around pushing boulders, and it's just, it's awful. And that, you're right, the system's super antiquated.
It's weird because it's the same thing when we're in the military. We used to see that a lot as well with it's the people who we call it drinking the Kool-Aid. If you decide to just go with the flow and not try to rock the boat and just, blend in and forget about all your little ambitions and your projects that you these bright ideas you have, and just say, okay, I'll do the work as it's prescribed.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people who excel, and they go on to be, the head of the department, and it's just like, or in the military, those become the commanders, and it's like,
they go in 20 years.
They do the career. Yeah, they do the full thing. It's like, why are we incentivizing this behavior?
But then you have the ones who are like, just like this, they want to do their best, and they're trying to make changes, because like military culture obviously has a lot of things that needs to change. There's been a lot in recent news. Yes. and the same thing, like, you get these leaders, and they're just like constantly questioning, should I stay, because they are so burnt out.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like I think the longer you stay too, and I feel like a coping mechanism is teachers become numb to all this stuff. Like, they just, they're given, like, new teachers are the ones given all these, the bad classes, the challenging classes, the classes with the most fed kids, the classes with the most behavior problem kids, and after a while, when they see no change, they just, instead of speaking up, after a while, they just become numb, unless, they still, they're still optimistic and they still keep that hope. Mm-hmm. They just go with the flow, do 20 years, 25 years of teaching, 30 years of teaching, and then they look back and they're like, well, what did I do?
Right.
What did I do with my life?
Right. That's such a sad thing. And I think that a lot of people don't get that, which is why we do this podcast. Like, there's all these teachers that are just giving up, not because they're bad teachers, but because, like you said, it's coping. They got to make it. They've gone from trying to live this life of servitude to our community's youth and children to just trying to make it a day at a time.
So how are you getting past that? What motivates you to say, all right, I can deal with it, it's all good?
I think what motivates me is I try not to look at what other teachers are doing. I get really frustrated with adults more than with kids. I realize that in recent times. So right now, during the pandemic, what motivates me is the kids. Just, like, their excitement whenever I bring up a science topic, or, making the kids smile, laugh. It's just the kids. I do it for the kids. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If I see that there's like a negative teacher, negative adult out there, that works with me or that's around me or something, I just try to block that away from me and, and keep on doing what feels right to me. Mm-hmm. I don't have to be outspoken and do, because I'm not a super outspoken person, but, I think I lead with action. Yeah. And I feel like I don't think I need to be super, loud, and, as long as I know I'm doing the right thing, I'll just keep on doing it. Like, if I, for me, what feels right, if I, what I did before the start of the school year was I sent every single one of my students an email before I even met them. That took me forever, but I sent personalized email. And, I don't, some teachers were like, oh, well, why are you doing that? Like, that takes so long. Why don't you send them a mass email? I was like, I could do that. I know that would take, that would take so little of my time, but I want to send a personalized email just because I want to get to know the kids, especially now during, virtual. Like, it's so hard for me to get to know them. Yeah. I want to start building that connection with them, before day one. Right. And so I feel like it's working out so far. The kids are very, they're starting to get, be more open and share about their lives, show me their little baby brothers, sisters.
So it sounds like the strategy.
The kids are the ones that motivate me the most right now.
It sounds like the strategy is focus on what you love and not on what you hate about it. So I can definitely feel the love that you have for the kids. I mean, it's very obvious that you actually care and you want them to know it, and I think at the end of the day, the fact that they do know it is what matters or what counts.
So you teach science, and but then you had gotten involved with the AVID program, and like Anthony said, it was 2 years into your teaching career. So talk about how you got into AVID.
So I was an AVID student when I was in middle school. So seventh, eighth grade, I was an AVID student. And then in high school, I was also an AVID student. So total of 6 years. When I realized I wanted to be a teacher, I knew that I wanted to be involved in AVID somehow. Somehow, I didn't know how, but I was like, I need to be part of AVID. I need to be in a school that has AVID. So what I did was, the school that I ended up working, the school that I'm at now, they have AVID. And my first year, I found out that there was an AVID site team program, AVID site team. So my goal was to join the site team, get to know, how to get involved in AVID. And I even asked the coordinator at the time, like, how do you want me to get involved in AVID? I want to get involved. I was an AVID student. And then she said, oh, you could be a guest speaker in my AVID class. So I was a guest speaker in her AVID class. I slowly got immersed. And then my second year, I think, of teaching, she decided to step down. She was like, I've been an AVID coordinator for a while. I think I'm going to step down. Would you take over? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And she's like, I'll help you. And she helped me. Like the first year, like she helped me with everything. Oh, you need to fill out this paperwork, get this data. And she helped me out so much, and she still does. But it's just, I was kind of scared. I was like, okay, that's so much responsibility being in charge of a program that's been around at the school since 1998. Right. What if I mess up? Yeah, definitely. That was my fear, like messing it up. But yeah, I slowly try to get involved in it because I knew it made such a big difference in my life. I knew I wanted to give back to the program.
And talk a little bit about what AVID is for people who don't know.
AVID is a college prep program. It stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. It's aimed for students that are first generation college students, students that, it's a college prep course. So students want to go to college. These students, they research colleges, they research careers, they learn organization skills. They learn how to do the famous Cornell notes or focus notes now, tutorial. We focus a lot on their grades. We go on field trips, college prep, like the SATs. Well, now it's not that important. SATs, ACTs. But yeah, we just do a wide variety of different things to help prepare the kids for high school, college, and real life.
And when your experience with it, tell us about that. So you were a student and you went through the AVID program. How did you even get started? What was your first impression of it as a student? That kind of thing. Tell us about that.
As a student, I was excited. I already told you guys, I love collecting like my supplies, having the highlighters. And so, we did like planner checks, binder checks, like every week or so. So I was just prepared. I love that. I love that part of AVID. And I love that family, because there's, you do have like an AVID family. You see each other as a family. And so I love that aspect of AVID. So, all the good things and even bad things from my AVID experience, I try to bring them into the classroom. So I tell the kids, like, I know you hate doing tutorials, or I know you hate doing this, because I was in your shoes. I hated that, but I still, dealt with it. I know how you're feeling. And then, when it comes to, it's hard. If you're a first generation college student, it's so hard to see what's coming next. And so when I'm talking to them about, college and stuff, I try to put that in perspective. Like, when I was their age, what were my assumptions about college? Like, what did I think college was like? And so I tried to connect with how my life was at that age, and then connect it with my lived experience with about college.
So were you recruited into AVID because you were a first generation going into like college bound person, or how did that work out?
Yeah, how are AVID students identified?
It depends, and different sites is different. In my case, there was a person that came from a school, from a middle school, and said, "Oh, I was a 6th grade," and said, "Oh, look, we have this college prep program. You could apply." And I just filled out the application. You wrote like an essay and filled out like, all these different questions, and then I got in. In my school, we have an AVID application where we have all these questions for them, and then they could answer them. We also have our site team also comes up with a list of prospective students, so we'll send out the application to those kids first. And we know that, those kids are AVID like material by, if those kids are respectful, you think they want to go to college, not necessarily like being first generation, that's important, college student, but we also recruit kids that aren't first generation college students that might need that extra support, that we know might need like some sort of family, like an AVID family, because they might not have a family at home. There's just different, good grades are important, but it's also a wide variety of things that we see in a student. I know that some people are like, oh, well, this kid's in honors. Shouldn't this kid be an AVID? I'm like, we try to look for the average student, not necessarily just honors material. But, if they're honors material, and they want to go to college and they're the first in their family, then yeah, go for it. Like that works.
It's so interesting because I actually remember when AVID started, because I was a freshman in high school in 1998, and I was identified to be an honors student, and then I had met some AVID kids, and they were like, "Oh, we're doing this AVID," and sometimes it did come up where they were like, they would ask me like, "How come you're not an AVID?" Or like the teachers would say something, and then I'd be like, "Well, I heard of it, but nobody sat with me," because I remember the counselors when they come to you in 8th grade. And they were like, "You're going to be in honors." And they were like, "So we're just not going to tell you about AVID." And I was like, okay. And I was a first generation college student, and it was a struggle because I had to figure it out on my own. And so I think about, as you're talking, like for the honors students, I guess it was assumed that my parents went to college, or I don't know, because they definitely didn't. So it's just like, I don't know. So it's interesting that, I don't know, we still haven't fixed that yet, to be honest. Our honor kids are still tend to be a privileged class, and then a few first generations, or students who probably would benefit from AVID end up in honors too, because they're doing really well academically, and then it's like we're not thinking about, well, since they're honor students or AP students, because we don't really do honors anymore, are we making sure that they actually have what they need? Because not all AP students have college-bound parents, or their parents were never college-bound. And so it's really interesting. You talk about a little bit about AVID Excel sometimes. What is AVID Excel specifically?
AVID Excel is, there's an AVID elective, and that's the normal AVID that we hear, at school. AVID Excel, it's aimed for middle school kids. I think middle school. It's an AVID program for long-term English learners. These are kids that have been EL kids for, I don't know, 6 years or more. I think 5-6 years or more. Some of them were born here in the U.S. Some of them were born in a different country, but they haven't exited the EL program. They're still EL students, and so AVID Excel it's kind of like an elective, but it's not, because these kids can't have electives because they haven't exited the EL program. So it's like a mesh between ELD and AVID. So we try to teach them, we scaffold more, they have more routines to help them pass the LPAC, the test that they have to take that they have to pass in order to exit out from ELD. But at the same time, they're also getting the college prep stuff. So they're researching about colleges. They're, learning how to organize themselves. They're learning about careers. So it's like a 2-for-1.
Yeah. I just want to point out, it is ridiculous that a student would be identified as an EL for 6 years. And I think what people don't understand is like you said, some of them are born here in the United States, but their parents might speak their native language strictly at home. When they come to school, that's where they're going to learn English, because English is spoken on campus. Unless it's an immersion program for language, they're going to be speaking English. So it's like really to really think about this, though. Students spend more time with us than they do with their parents by the time they're in the K through 12 system. So it's like if the majority of their day is with us speaking English, and they're still 6 years later not passing the LPAC, what are we not doing to help those kids? Like, that is so ridiculous.
You know, I feel I'm conflicted about that test. Like I really don't agree with how teachers or how a district decides when a kid should be exited. I don't agree with that, because I feel like that test, if you were to give that test to a native English speaker, some kids won't pass that test.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
I've never looked at it.
I don't understand how they could assume that, oh, if an English learner passes this test, then they're good to go. You know, like native English speakers can't even pass that test. That test is hard. And
I've never actually looked at that test. But you do bring up a good point, though, too. When I am able to attend trainings for English language development training, and we'll talk about the different scaffolding techniques that you can use, every time I'll learn a technique, and I'll be like, all the kids need to learn this technique, like the thing that it teaches. And I've said that before. I was like, I'm starting to feel like every student is an English language learner, because we're not just talking about conversational English, we're talking about academic English. And our native English speakers who only speak English, yeah, some of those scaffolds I use whether I have an ELD or not, or an ELL or not, because I'm like, all these kids don't know how to speak academic English, and these scaffolds work for all of them, which is really interesting. So it actually, now, like, putting that together is like, oh, it makes sense. The LPAC is testing for academic English, not conversational English or like everyday English.
I think it's broken down into different categories. So I think they have a speaking, they have a writing part, and they have, I think, a reading part. I think they have three different things that they test for. But it's just, you know, I feel like it's like another hoop that they have to pass. Like another thing that it's just, you know, it's so hard to exit ELD for a lot of kids, not because they don't know English, but because there's just so many hoops. And then once they pass that test, they can't even exit out the program unless they score well on their the test, the smarter balance one.
Oh yeah,
if they don't score well on that, then they're like, oh no, well you're still like below basic or whatever. You can't exit out of this. You have to wait. Even though they passed that test. And so by that point, the kids are kind of sad and depressed, because they're like, well, I've been in this program for so long, there's no way for me to get out.
And then they can't take electives, which is like a punishment for not being able to pass these tests. So Anthony was just asking the SBAC. The SBAC is the standardized test that we now have. Like when we were young, it was STAR. Did you ever take the STAR test when you were in?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay. Well, I remember it was.
Well, that's in California. We grew up in a different state, so it's probably something else. It's called something.
It was STAR only California, and I didn't even know that.
So these are state tests. Yeah.
They're state tests.
Oh yeah.
State standardized.
And in Virginia, it was like Terra Nova or something.
Oh, like okay. Oh, they were into the space thing. I guess stars, Terra Novas. Whatever it was, I hated it too, and I hate it still.
Yeah, you know what? Now that I'm thinking back to my school days. You know, the good old days. I was the only minority in like the AP program for a while, I think, at my high school. I was the only Filipino in my high school, though, so it kind of tells you. I was one of two, the other one being my sister. Yeah, and like at the time, we didn't have an AVID program in Virginia, but I do recall there being like, I don't know. It was just an odd thing. I didn't even think about it. I'm a first generation in terms of my parents went to school in the Philippines, so like their entire idea of what I was supposed to do was just be valedictorian, and then the rest would just happen, kind of thing. So they were like, just do really good in high school. And I was like, okay. They didn't know anything about applying to colleges, though. They didn't tell me I had to apply. They didn't tell me there was a standardized test to take. They were completely surprised by this. They didn't even know if there were good schools or bad schools near us. They had no clue. They were just like, be a nurse. Like that was their foundation. That was like kind of what they were familiar with. Is that the case for most of the AVID kids? Is that like sort of the background that it's intended for?
To open up their eyes, yes, so they could see what else is out there. Because like even like for me growing up in Stockton, like I felt like I didn't really know much. Like I didn't know what was out there. Like I knew there was UOP, I knew there was Delta, but I didn't know what else was out there. I didn't know how to get there, how to get to college. I didn't know about the test that they had, that you had to take. I didn't know about the financial aid stuff. And I know that a lot of kids that decide to take AVID, it's because of that. They just don't know how. They know they want to get there, but they just don't know the steps that they need to take before they get there.
You were like me. You were trying to teach your parents how to do the FAFSA. It's like, how backwards is this? It's like, I have no idea about finances whatsoever, and I'm going to teach you to do this financial paperwork.
And the good thing about AVID in high school was that I had a great counselor, had great AVID teachers. Like they went with us like every single step. Like I still remember filling out my UC application, and and filling out the FAFSA. I remember those moments.
Wow.
Like they like every month, I think they would do these like sessions where in high school with parents, and my mom would always go. Like she was always super involved.
Wow.
But she just didn't know how to get there, because my mom also, she went to school in Mexico, but she didn't know how school was, kind of like in your case, Anthony.
Yeah. Okay.
How to get to how to apply for college here, because it's so different.
It's very different.
And so I remember those moments, and I don't think I would have been able to do it by myself, because there were so many questions that I was just not sure. And then the language in those applications, I didn't understand some of the words.
Yeah.
I was just like, what does this mean? Wait, what do you want? Like, what section of the taxes do you want? Like, I don't know what numbers I should put. And so it was just so hard. But that's what I loved about the AVID program in high school, that they just went, they worked on everything with you together. So you weren't doing it by yourself.
It's so obvious. It's like a huge need, especially I think in the West Coast, where the Hispanic population is huge. And it's literally a translation issue where people aren't getting access. It's like, if they knew this stuff, they would obviously go after this stuff, but no one's giving them that basic introduction to, this is how you do it. And AVID kind of filled that gap, and I think that's amazing. I was reading up on it. I was like, oh, so it's all started in San Diego, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's like super diverse down there, and I'm sure that there was a lot of issues where it was simply just, again, like introducing basic steps and getting people on the right track, and after that, all the changes were undeniable. They could see the progress that was being had. So it's no wonder that it's still going strong, and that it's benefiting so many people. And
yet it's not in every school, which is, I think, crazy. Like you would think every school would have it. Mm-hmm. But I know my site had issues. We had it a few years ago, I think for a year or two, and then we didn't have funding for it, so it just stopped. That was it, and it was already devastating to lose the program. When apparently they'd had it before. We got the program back, and then the funding was cut, or something happened to the funding, and then all those kids who started only got 2 years of it. Or one for new students, and then it was like, well, that's it, and it just kind of went away, and it was really frustrating, because it's such a necessary program. And I loved it, because when I get AVID students, they'd have their little schedulers, and they like have their little things, and I would be like, whoa, what are you doing over there? Like, I can I get some of those for the rest of the class? Like, like all of you need to learn how to organize your schedule. There's like really important stuff that's taught.
What I realize is that, there's the AVID program is going strong, but I feel like there's also some AVID programs that are closing down in some schools. It could be because of the funding, but I feel like in most cases, it's not so much the funding, it's more the teacher commitment. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of your energy to be an AVID teacher. Because the kids, they start, like, remember I mentioned the AVID family, they see you as a part of the family. So, any little thing that happens to them, they come to you and they tell you everything. There'll be moments like my first group of AVID kids where I would cry with them. And, and then if something happened in my life and I would cry and they would cry with me. And so it was just, it was like an emotional thing. Like that's my place where I know that I feel I could actually, like I could be myself with my kids, with my science kids too, but I could actually be, more open with my AVID kids. And I know that they'll understand. Yeah. Just because I give them that place to express themselves. But I feel that AVID program, it requires a lot of committed teachers that are willing to put in the effort. Because like what a lot of people don't realize is that it's not just teaching the AVID class. You also have to do a lot of data collection. Right. You have to do, you have to accumulate evidence. They do site visits. They do so many different things. Like in order to keep your program running, that it takes too much. And if you're not willing to put that extra time, especially as a coordinator, then people will be like, okay, you know what, I'm out. I'll just teach my regular subjects.
And there's like annual training too, right? Like don't you guys have to go to like a summer conference or some kind of something? Yeah, it is. It's a huge commitment, but it's so necessary.
It's like a 1 year thing. If you want to, if you want to keep on learning more, then you go more years. But it's really, honestly, I feel like the best trainings are the AVID trainings. Like I really recommend those. Like they teach you so many different strategies. They teach you how to be a better teacher. Even if you're not an AVID teacher, you learn so many different strategies. They have, they have strands for English teachers, math teachers, science teachers on how to incorporate different strategies. And it's just great. Like for any subject.
I was really fortunate when I went through Teachers College at San Joaquin County, and one of my instructors that I had for a while, I was really lucky to have her a couple times. She was an AVID teacher, so she would tell us like, some of the stuff I'm gonna teach you is from AVID, and she would just like, and she was working with all the single subject English teachers, and she was just like, here's some things that we learned in AVID. Full disclosure, but like this is what you need because it works. And I just remember being so grateful that I was able to have her as a teacher, and she was able to explain that to us, these strategies. And it's definitely universal. I think that all teachers should have some sense of an AVID training.
So what are the resources available as a coordinator to support your AVID teachers? Like how are we incentivizing the AVID program for teachers? How are we recruiting teachers to do this? It's very intensive. So it seems so crazy to me that schools wouldn't be doing everything they could to ensure that they had teachers wanting to do this program. Is that not the case? Like, what's going on with that?
I'm fortunate that at my site, there's a lot of people willing to do AVID. There's some people in my site too that were AVID students themselves. So they, that motivates them to, be an AVID, be involved in AVID. But I feel like usually the younger teachers are the ones that are, the most willing to be part of AVID, be AVID teachers just because, they have more energy than older teachers. But, in some districts, we get a stipend, but it's not too much. It's like, what, $250 for supplies? Each person, the coordinator gets another $250 in my district. So a total of $500 a year with all that stuff. But it's not too much, after taxes, what is it? It's not too much. But I feel like the reason why a lot of us just do AVID is because, we believe in the program.
Yeah.
And we've had students that come back and say how thankful they are, how great it was. And next year I'm going to have my first group of kids that will graduate from high school, and I'm hoping that that when they go to college they come back and they're guest speakers in my AVID class and they get to say their experience. But I think it's just what motivates us is how the kids are doing. And
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a family, like you said. If they go on and do big things, they're gonna want to come back and tell you those things, of course, and you're gonna be able to celebrate that with them. That's amazing.
Speaking of supporting teachers, I definitely want to talk about this because I'm curious. So, just background: Linda and I know each other because we went through the Educational Entrepreneurship Program at University of Pacific, also known as UOP. And you, when we graduated, were working on a project to support teachers of color, like creating these kind of like affinity groups, I guess you would call it. Like, you want to talk a little bit about what that is and where you're at this point?
Yeah, so I was so my project was creating these groups for minority teachers where they could express themselves. They could kind of like an AVID program, but for minority teachers, where they have a safe place to express, to get resources, and stuff like that. Right now, just because of the pandemic, I haven't officially started my plan. I have my agendas already. I have everything ready. I've been waiting a little bit to see what happens if we could go back to school. And then these last couple of weeks have just been crazy with trying to adapt with all the technology, changing my lessons. I haven't done anything yet this fall, but I will. I'm hoping that maybe in a month or two I will. I'll start.
I think that makes sense, because you said earlier you're just in your second week of school, right? You guys just started 2 weeks ago.
Second week.
So it's like definitely not the right time to be like, want to go to this meeting? No.
No one wants to meet right now. No one wants to meet, and so I haven't even seen some of my teachers, at my site outside of the regular staff meetings. I haven't even had a chance to communicate with them just because everyone's so overwhelmed. Right. And so I want to just wait a little bit until I'm settled down, they're a little bit settled down and relax, and then I'm like, okay, now we could talk about it.
So let's talk then a little about the inspiration behind that project. Like, what was the seed that you are now fertilizing?
So the reason why I came up with this was because of the whole AVID program. Like, I just, I saw that it works with kids. This type of program would also work with adults. And a lot of teachers of color don't get that support. You don't even see a lot of teachers of color in schools, and so you kind of just feel like an outsider or like the token colored teacher.
Right.
And there's like a kid that there's like a phone call that needs to be made, and there's no one that speaks Spanish. Well, they're going to call on you, the teacher that's like the Chicana teacher. But it's just so weird, to be in a school site where most of the teachers are not minorities. And, it would be nice to have that support where teachers kind of, they look like you. They might not teach the same subject as you, but they at least look like you, and they might go through the same struggles as you.
Mm-hmm. What I'm curious is because this is true. So my school, our ethnic demographics don't match our teaching staff demographics, right? So predominantly white teaching staff, predominantly Hispanic student body. Is that true for your school as well?
Yeah, there's definitely more white teachers at my school than, there's more minority students than, white teachers at our school. Yeah. But we are growing. There's more minority teachers now. But yeah, there's that discrepancy. And I think a lot of schools are like that. I don't think I've ever been to a school where it's not like that, where most of the kids are minorities, and then, most of the teachers are, white teachers. Like, I haven't really seen it flip.
I don't want to name the school because I don't know if this is true, but I heard a rumor there is a high school in Stockton where they have staff meetings in English and then they have a Spanish one because there is a predominantly Hispanic staff. I have not verified that rumor yet, but if it was true, I think that is amazing.
Cool.
That there's
maybe in the English immersion schools, the Spanish immersion schools, English ones, maybe in those schools, they probably would have that. They probably would have, the teachers would represent the students. But in most cases, in most schools in the U.S., I don't think that's representative. There's just I feel like there's just so many different hoops to be a teacher. Like, I know so many people that want to be a teacher, but they can't be a teacher because, we have to pass the CBEST.
Yeah. Then
pass the CSET, 3 CSETs, or maybe even 4. Like, I had to pass 4 CSETs because I got a Spanish authorization. And so, then there's just so many hoops that you have to pass to be a teacher, and especially for a minority. It's just so hard because, English is your second language in most cases. And, you're trying to juggle with 2 languages, and then, with with all the steps to be a teacher, because it's not like, oh, I want to be a teacher now, and then you're a teacher in a week. Like, It's just build up to that. and it's just so hard. And so I just get excited when I see teachers that resemble me, because they, they went through the same thing, and I just want to hear their story. Kind of like what you guys want to hear, teacher stories, like just hearing their story, how they got there, what motivated them.
Was that true for you too while you were a student at Davis? I'm asking because when I was in college, it was a huge deal that I was invited to go there as an admitted student, because my idea of the school I went to was that I was going to be the only brown kid around there. But when I went to go visit, I was, pleasantly surprised and just amazed at the amount of different types of people that I encountered. And I was like, oh yeah, I could totally go to this place. But prior to that experience, I was dead set. I was like, I don't know why they admitted me. I'm going to be the only one there. I really believe that. So did you feel that way at all at UC Davis? I don't know what Davis is like, but.
Davis, well, I think there's high percentages of Asian students at Davis.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a lot of, white students. There's some Hispanic Latino students there. I was fortunate that most of my time in Davis, I actually lived with people that resembled me. Like I lived with people that were Chicanas. Like my first year, there were like 9 of us. 9 of us. I lived in a suite. Maybe I think no. I was the only Mexican American that one. Like all the other ones were. There's only one white student, and then the rest were Asian. Well, actually, one was Filipina. So and the rest were Asian. And then my second year, we were all Latinas.
Wow. So your first experience with like being in a sort of an all white space was as a teacher then?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, growing up in Stockton, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
What I loved about Stockton was, everything was so diverse. Like I got to hang out with people that were Filipinos, people that were, Indian, people that were white, people that were African American. So I was just so used to that.
Yeah.
And so, even though like sometimes I feel weird when I'm like in the staff lounge and having a conversation. Like their life experiences are so much different than mine.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I don't even know what to say. I'm like,
I don't know how to contribute to this conversation. When I was in second grade, my dad was stationed because he was in the military. My dad was in the Army, and we moved from Virginia to North Dakota. And I spent the next 4 years explaining to people where the Philippines was. And that I wasn't from the Sioux tribe, because I used to hang out on the reservation with my buddies, and they were like, which tribe? And I was like, the Filipino tribe, man. But it's just a crazy feeling when you finally get to a place where people know what you're talking about when you start talking about your family. And it's like, what? You know that? It's just so crazy after all. Like my life it was just back to back to back. Like I have no idea. It's like, okay, let me break it down for you. Like, okay, here's the map. See where Japan is. You kind of know what Japan, everyone kind of knows what Japan is. So I'm like, okay, if you know what Japan is, now I can show you where the Philippines is. Let me tell you a little bit about that place. And this is a guy who never lived in the Philippines. Like I only visited very rarely as a kid, but I had to make, that kind of effort just to like get people to understand, like, I am not from this area. Like I don't understand what's going on. And I actually had a kid when I went to Virginia as an 8th grader ask me, are you black or are you white? Like that was an actual question I got. I was like, how do you come up with this stuff? Oh man.
You're just like, no.
No.
Well, then compared to Virginia compared to Stockton, in Stockton there's a whole bunch of Filipinos, and so you probably you felt like you didn't have to explain yourself.
Now people are like, you're Cambodian, right?
Not even, because I think we have a lot of Filipinos here. I actually, because going to the South because I was in the military, and the thing that stood out to me, I always tell this story. When I was 18 years old, I went to basic training, and I became aware of how few Black people we have in California. And because when you go to the South, there's a lot more Black people just anywhere, as opposed to here. And this is the thing, I had ended up talking to some of my battle buddies about it, because they would say, oh, you're from California, that's so cool, it's so diverse, it's like a melting pot, blah blah blah. And I remember one day being like, actually no. And they're like, what do you mean no? And then I had to explain how there's like regions, there's like, well, like it's Asians live in this area code and Black people live in that area code and Mexicans live all over the place, and then white people just, and it was like, and I go, so we don't really see each other. Like all the schools I went to were predominantly Hispanic. And then the next thing you had were South Asians. You had Vietnamese and Cambodian, and then we also had Filipino, which they kind of go Hispanic or Asian. We don't know. Like they just, it was like, and so one day when, so I remember having to explain that to people. I was like, I go, but I've never really, I've never had a lot of Black people Black kids in my school. It's just, they all went to a certain school and it wasn't mine. And, but then as years went by, I remember one day, actually, Anthony and I were hanging out with one of his friends and we were talking about, Stockton is like one of the top cities with a Black population.
It's one of the largest Black populations in California.
Yeah, so Stockton,
it's between Oakland, Richmond, and Stockton.
We're at the top of having a largest Black population, but we still really don't have that many Black residents. I think it's like 13% of the city, which is not a lot. And so I remember him and his friend were kind of joking about that, like, oh my gosh, this is the top 5 and there's only 13% of the demographic. That's pretty sad, California. But then I said, well, all due respect, and I hear what you're saying and I agree. When I was in the South, I was shocked by how few Asians there were. And it was kind of like, oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's super true.
Because all my friends growing up were Asian or Hispanic.
So that's what I was saying. Like when I moved here, people knew different kinds of Asian, and that blew me away. I was like, they were like, "Are you Cambodian, Vietnamese, or are you Thai?" And I was like, "Whoa, you just said Asian. I identify as Pacific Island." No, but it's funny because like then I do get Hawaiian, Samoan, Chamorro. Are you from Guam? Like. And I love it. I love the fact that that's the conversation. It's like, yes.
It's not just, are you Asian?
No, it's like, what kind of Black person are you? Like, what? No. Yeah, and it's really interesting. Like, it's a completely different dynamic here.
But definitely, obviously, we still have our issues because, like
we got a mix, yeah.
We do. I can see why people misconstrued when I was in basic training that California was so diverse. Like we do have a lot of populations, but we're definitely not a mixing pot. We are not mixing. There's not a lot of that. And then we do find ourselves in situations where, like in teaching, like you said, there's a predominantly white staff, and that can be really hard for teachers of color to find each other, to be able to kind of be each other's safe haven. And I don't think I don't know if people understand that, white people specifically, that when you're a minority constantly, you need a break. And so having something like an affinity group, or just like a place where you can go and be with people who share the same culture as you, is that respite that you need from being around people where you have to explain, certain things, or they're saying things like you said, that they're talking about things that you cannot relate to, and you're just feeling out of the loop all the time, and you need to feel like you got to get pulled back into a community. And I think white people specifically, don't understand that, because that's not really something that exists for them. So I think I'm very much looking forward to hearing about what happens when you are able to do your group work with the teachers at your school, because I think that's going to be really good for everybody.
It'd be a huge improvement on the situation if you were able to incorporate that. Having that kind of space in college for me was one of the reasons why I stayed in college. I had a support group of people there that I knew I could turn to and would get me involved and would look out for me, basically. And I think they also helped me. We were all on the same kind of journey to sort of get an understanding of our history, an understanding of our identities. Like some of the information that wasn't shared with us about our histories, right? So like one of the biggest things, I just recently got back in touch with one of my old professors who reached out to me after 10 years, to do a project with him. But he's like he was my playwriting professor, but in his class I wrote about Filipino history, and it was the only class other than US military history that I did anything regarding Filipino history. I did any work. I wrote papers in playwriting and plays in playwriting about Filipino history, because that's what I was like, can I do this somewhere? And it happened to be with my Filipino professor, who was a theater professor, but hey, I had to get it somewhere, right? But the fact is, like, it's so crazy that that information is it's just denied to us, and that I feel like I spent my whole life learning the intricacies of each president and every mistress they had and the notes they wrote to the mistresses. And I'm like, can I get one paper? Can I read one chapter about some of these people that shaped, the cities in the Philippines, and that affected the Filipino communities that would become the first Filipinos in America? I had to do my own research to learn that Stockton was like the spot for Filipinos to come to. And like, it was just a huge thing, like, for me when I first came here. I was like, Rosalie, I can't believe you live near Stockton.
I didn't even know. So like, that's like when we first met, that was one of the first things, like, we had met in Korea, and then he's like, where are you from? I was like, oh, I'm from this small town in California. You're not going to know. And he's like, try me. Everybody thinks they know California when they're not from California. And I was like, well, the largest city is this city called Stockton. And he was like, oh my God, Stockton, California. And I was like,
no way.
I was like, are you?
First time I hear someone that excited.
Yeah.
She definitely was surprised that I was excited about Stockton.
And I was like, are you being sarcastic right now? Or like, and he's like, no, Stockton, like, he's like, the Filipinos. And then he just like, and I was like, yeah, we have Filipinos. And I remember him asking me that too. He goes, so did you grow up with Filipino friends? And I was like, yeah.
I did not, of course. So
I was like, some of my best friends are Filipino, actually. And he's like, really? And I go, you are Filipino, right? And he's like, I never had Filipino friends.
Not in high school. I had to wait to college to find Filipino, like, a real big group of Filipinos to hang out with.
But I didn't even know. I knew we had a large Filipino population because I grew up here, but I didn't know, like, we have a huge history in Filipino culture. And I was he had to teach me that. And I'm like, dang, like, I was from here. Like, and how come no one taught us that?
We're denied that information. It's just straight up, hey, you need to learn about Mr. and Mrs. President Madison and his mistress, or whatever. That's more important. We got to read the original source of, like, every Civil War soldier letter home. It's like, dude, I don't need that. I don't. I get it. It's important. But can I just get a little bit of the other cultures? I just want to know a little bit about what happened. Like, they literally didn't talk about Dolores Huerta at all. How?
Yeah. How? Imagine if the kids were to, the teachers, the history teachers were to teach them, look, this is what makes Stockton, Stockton's so important.
Yes.
Your people did this, your people did that, the farm workers did this.
Yes.
It's just stuff like that. Growing up, I didn't know, like, kind of like what you said, like, I didn't know all this information about Stockton. Like, I love learning about history. I would go to Hagen Museum and all, just like, I would like look at all that stuff, and I would go to like Bank of Stockton, like the old Bank of Stockton, and then look at the pictures and like read all the information. I would get so excited, but I didn't really know too much about the information until once I left Stockton. Once I left Stockton, that's when I realized, oh, look, Stockton is not, it's not a super bad place like people picture it to be. And it's weird because Anthony was so excited about Stockton, and usually when I tell people about Stockton, they're like, oh my God, like,
they're like,
have you ever gotten shot? Did any, like, are you okay? Like, or they assume that you're tough, super tough because you grew up there.
Or the response I've usually gotten, because I went to school I went to San Jose State for my undergrad, they were usually like, ew, or, oh, I'm sorry. Like, and it's like, okay, that's rude. Like, I'm like, but then I also, like, I grew up not wanting to come back. Like, I remember being that kid that I was like, oh my God, I hate the 209. I never want to come back. And in college too, I was like, I'm never going back to the 209. And then, like, I did. And I feel like this is where my work is now. Like, I can't go anywhere else. And I think it's really cool because we've been, like, Mayor Tubbs's documentary just came out. Did you know about his Stockton on My Mind documentary?
I heard of it.
Okay,
yeah,
so definitely should watch it. It's super good. And he was interviewed by Jonathan Van Ness on his podcast, which I thought was really cool. He's the Queer Eye, one of the Queer Eye guys. And but he talks about that too. Like he said, like, I didn't want to come back either. Like I was like, I'm done. So, but I think it's so important that we teach them that Stockton has this really rich history that is important to share, and that history includes what led to what Stockton is today, and that the only way we're going to change it is if I think our kids, we all need to go experience the world, but we got to be willing to come back and like try something new and make a difference, and I think Stockton's the greatest opportunity for that, because there's still so many abandoned buildings, and there's still such a need for business. It's like, it really is kind of primed for young people to kind of get their claws in and like try something, so I don't know. It's really frustrating though that
Stockton, Sacramento, I think wherever you're doing it, as long as you're reinvesting in the community of those who are most vulnerable, that's what it's all about. Because what happens to a lot of the talent, it just gets invested outside in other places where we're not benefiting, we're not building on the efforts of the past, and we're not creating that strong foundation. And really, these communities, if we think about the history of them, these communities that we're talking about, these were once prosperous communities that were abandoned after integration. A lot of these schools that we look at in Stockton that were once these prominent places, after integration, I mean, a lot of people just left. And so if we choose to come back and do the things that Mayor Tubbs is talking about, and invest in Stockton scholars and connect people to the resources so they can get education, they may feel like you're saying that they're a part of that family, and that they're a part of this effort, and they might want to come back and give back to that effort. So
I'm curious about this. Kind of makes me think about kind of going back to specifically to you. You teach science, and there's a lot of, it's become popular to talk about this, although it's always been needed, about being like deliberately anti-racist in our teachings, and they use the term like decolonizing our curriculum and stuff. And I'm always, as an English teacher, that's pretty easy. We introduce Black authors, Hispanic authors, Asian authors. Like we talk about we can have discussions on race, because speaking and listening is part of our curriculum. I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on how that looks in science? Because I feel like science and math, it's a little harder to be anti-racist. Like, what does that look like in science?
I try to, so I'll give you an example. Like when I talk about cells, I talk about Henrietta Lacks.
Oh, yeah.
Henrietta Lacks, the African-American woman that had a cancer. She had cervical cancer. And her cells are known as the HeLa cells. These are her cells were the ones that helped develop the polio vaccine. So many different scientific discoveries. Her cells help with that. And so I try to bring that up, like her story, who she was, what happened to her cells, how the laboratories like exploited her cells. Right. They made all this money. She never saw a cent. Right. And all that information, and so that the African American students, they could see how they contributed, how they contributed their contribution to science. And so every moment that I have, I try to, if I see connections between different races, with science, I try to bring them over. I try to connect them. But that's an example, like what I do. Like I try to, like I talk about her, and I also show the kids, like, look, like, do you guys think it's fair that this lady, she, they took her, her cells, her body, and they used all, her cells for, to make scientific discoveries, and she didn't get a cent. Like her family didn't even know about that. The family didn't even know that they were making money out of her cells. Right. And so we have good conversations about that.
So I guess it's just introducing, like, not just focusing on the science, the labs and the chemicals and the cells and the amoebas, but also talking about the people behind those discoveries. Yeah, I don't even remember.
Because a lot of times they don't, you don't hear in science, you don't hear a lot about, how women contribute into science. Right. And then even like, to make it even worse, how minorities contribute to science. And so, if women are already not really represented in science, that's a good way to start. Just try to bring up more women, like, women that discover, like Rosalind Franklin. The lady, she was the one that helped discover, the double helix, the DNA.
Yeah.
But she wasn't really important because, Watson and Crick were the ones that took most of the credit. And so that type of stuff, like, that's what I try to bring up to the kids.
Their names are the ones on the exam, though. They're the ones that we got to remember for the exam. That's why. You got to know Watson and Crick for the exam, so that's the one you remember.
Yeah. But it's just like, just stuff like this. Like, I still think teaching them the content is important. Like, cells, metabolism, all that stuff. But I also think that it's important to show them, this is why it's related to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then even relating to, like, diabetes,
Yeah.
who's most likely to get diabetes?
Exactly.
What different races, and then we could talk about why do you think that African Americans, Latinos are the ones that are most likely to get diabetes?
Mm-hmm.
What do they eat? How does their day-to-day life look like?
Mm-hmm.
Just pointing out some things, because sometimes it's just hard for them to see.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody says it. People just assume that they know, or they just don't want to say anything, so they don't excite the kids or make them angry or something. But I think it's just good for them to see different perspectives.
I think that's important too. I'm trying to think back to the science classes I took in high school, and I don't remember anyone ever really bringing up the scientists that discovered these things. Like, they might have mentioned a name quickly in a book, like the textbook might have said, oh, this was discovered by so and so. So even just that alone, it was kind of, like I said, it was always focused on, like, let's just do the lab now, and let's have you draw your graphic organizer and whatever. But looking, like, as you're saying this, like, I probably would have been, I've always been interested in science. I wasn't like I got a B in science, but I liked it, but like, if every lesson had been introduced with a, let's talk about the founder, and it was done with thoughtfulness, like what you do with your kids, of, like, not just any founder, but the ones who are going to represent the students in the classroom. Man, like, I would have loved science class. That probably would have been one of my favorite classes.
Or even just acknowledging, and this is going to come from kind of left field, but I find it ridiculous that we don't have local knowledge of our own communities. For example, I mean, I was having this conversation with someone at work. I said, I was saying something about how before integration, like, there were certain hospitals where, minorities couldn't receive care. And he was like, no. And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure that's definitely true. And it was definitely more true in certain areas than others. And he was like, but how? How could that? So if you're telling me, if I had an emergency and I went to a hospital and I wasn't white, then they wouldn't treat me? And I was like, there were some hospitals for sure where, yes, that's the answer.
Yeah, that's
and
absolutely.
he couldn't believe it. He was like, no way. And I was like,
I can't even believe that he can't believe that. That's
right.
like a known thing.
Right, but I think the
wow.
problem is that a lot of people, if you would bring that up, that's so shocking. Like, how could that possibly be the case, right? Well, integration was throughout everything. People just think of integration as Brown v. Board and schools. But prior to Brown v. Board, it affected all public institutions, including hospitals. And then if you think about it, it's like, well, no wonder there weren't that many scientists who were women or of color, because they just weren't even allowed in those spaces. They weren't allowed to learn those skills oftentimes alongside white people, and then they weren't even allowed to work alongside white people. There was a black wing of the hospital and a white wing, or just no, whites only hospital. That's just the way it was. And the thing that I asked, I was like, I dare you to go down to St. Joseph's, downtown Stockton, and ask them when they had their first black doctor. Do you know when they had the first black doctor at St. Joseph's? And he was like, no. I was like, it had to be at some time, right? It had to happen at some point in time. There was the first black doctor at St. Joseph's, and I guarantee you, it wasn't before, it wasn't before integration. And I was like, how do you think that worked out? What do you think that was like for them? I was like, this whole thing is just stuff we don't even think about. We don't even consider, like, why is it this way? And it's hard now because this is how it was just 50 years ago, just 60 years ago, and people just seem to think like, well, it is what it is, and we should just accept it, and it's our fault if we can't fix it for ourselves. I don't know. Put things in a context, and you'll see like a different picture. I just think it's crazy we don't just tell the kids. I feel like if the kids knew this, it's like you'd have a better understanding of like, oh, I'm not dumb. Like it's like I'm not. I feel like for me personally, when I was a student and I was going through this, and I didn't know any. I knew plenty of nurses, but I didn't personally know like a lot of professional Filipinos. Most of the Filipinos I knew, the adults, were in the military. And so like I was like, that's what we do. And hey, I joined the military, right? But if there was that, I think I could have had a better idea of like what society was like in other areas of other professions. But I just didn't have access to that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
like I think that a lot of times schools focus on, oh, let's just teach the kids the content. But you can teach the kids the content, but at the same time try to relate it to their lives.
Right.
You can't just, if you just talk about the cells, you could relate it to your life, I guess. You're like, oh, if you have abnormal cells, you could get cancer. You could talk about what's inside of a cell, but really, do the kids want to hear that all the time? Some kids would be fascinated, but then other kids would be like, well, why is this important? Then you could go ahead and talk about, look, like back in the day, they used to spray people with all these pesticides, and that would damage their cells and that would cause them cancer. Like if you were to give them like a story, like a scenario,
right,
why this is important, then it all connects to them. And they're like, you know what? I feel like I'm so interested in this now. Like I want to know more about this. What if I want to be a scientist when I grow up? You start triggering these things in their minds just because they don't see this. Like, when it's so hard to see a lot of scientists of color, and so if you see, if you hear all these stories of how it impacted your community, or you see people that look like you, then you're more likely to do that.
And yeah, because you can't even, going back to the cells as an example, you can't even see cells. So a lot of kids are gonna be like, why should I care about something I can't even see? So it makes sense. I think to close out the podcast, to take it to a lighter note, tell us about life as a middle school sex education teacher.
Yeah. What about them
It's
cells?
so fun. It's so fun. It's my favorite unit. It's weird because at first when I started teaching, I did not want to think about it. I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, like these kids are going to ask these weird questions. How am I going to answer it with a straight face? But it's weird because I'm so serious. I try to be so serious, like the kids, like it's so funny because, so we normally go over the male reproductive system before we do female reproductive system. The kids draw penises everywhere.
Patriarchy.
Like the boys, especially they draw penises everywhere, right? And I don't know why boys do that. Girls, girls don't do that. So we do the male anatomy first, and everything's fine, right? The class is quiet. The kids are, it's a serious moment because, the kids are learning about themselves. And then we do it with the female part, and then everyone freaks out. Like when they see the female anatomy, I don't know why. Every single year,
oh my gosh.
Maybe because they're not used to seeing that. They're like, no one draws that. But everyone freaks out. And the girls are embarrassed. The boys are just so interested, like, oh, really? Like, I thought girls, like, bled to death. Like, are you telling me, like, they only bleed this much? Like, yeah. Like, then why didn't it make it seem like it's a big deal? Like, it's just so funny, like, to hear the boys, like, the misconceptions that the boys have about the female reproductive system. And then I have a question box where they could write, their questions that they have, about babies, about getting pregnant, and sometimes they even draw little diagrams. It's so funny. Like their misconceptions, what they have, a lot of this stuff they hear from their friends. They're like, oh no, did you know you can't get pregnant if you lay down for a while, you won't get pregnant. I'm like, who said this to you? And, just misconceptions. Or one time I had a kid that said, so if babies come out from the same hole that you poop out, right? No. funny that women have 3 holes. Like I always tell kids that, because then they start saying that, oh wait, but why do they come out? They come out from the same hole that you poop.
That's called a food baby.
A food baby.
That's what that's called. I had a couple of those earlier.
Yeah, but they're the way that they think about things is just so funny. Because they're so innocent still.
Do you see a difference from the beginning of the unit to the end of the unit in like their confidence with it, or are they still embarrassed?
No, I think as the unit goes by, they feel more comfortable, because we usually spend like 2-3 weeks on it. So at first they're just so scared, like they're super quiet. They just don't want to ask questions, or because I always tell them, like, we're not gonna say dick. We're gonna say penis. You know, we're gonna say vagina. We're gonna say these words.
Right.
Okay. So if you tell me like the slang word, I'm going to make you say the real word.
Right.
And so at the end, you know, they feel comfortable with it. Like they say the words. They're not going to just, you know, because they know what they're expected. So they feel more comfortable. They ask more questions. You know, they become little experts at it. But it's, you know, the first couple of days is pretty quiet and they're pretty embarrassed. Then afterwards they open up. And, you know, they don't even want the unit to end. They're like, all right.
They have more questions. They're like,
you're not going to tell my mom, are you?
I think that's so important because, so in the military, I was a unit victim advocate. They don't call them that anymore, but it was, I don't know, they have another name for it. But it was developed by the SHARP program, which is kind of in the news right now because of what happened to Vanessa Guillen. And I just read there was another soldier that was found murdered, and he may have been sexually assaulted as well. So when I was training to be a unit victim advocate, which was basically every battalion had to have 2 of them, and our job was to be an advocate for a victim of sexual assault. And it usually was green on green crime. So it was when a soldier raped another soldier. And so when we're in the training, that was one of the things they said too. They're like, you need to use the anatomically correct verbiage, because if they use any kind of word, like even if, and so they were telling us as advocates, we had to really help our survivors be comfortable with that, because when they get interrogated by, I hate to say interrogated, but sometimes they are interrogated, but when they're being interviewed by the CID, or when they have to go talk to the nurse or whatever, they're going to ask them, where did he touch you, or where were, you know, and it's like, you've got to get comfortable with the word, because in a court, if you call it a pee-pee, they're going to be like, okay, what exactly is that? Because we don't have the scientific term is a penis. And if you say penis, there's no question what part you're talking about, right? So I think it's important on so many levels, but for me, that's the one I always think about, because that was part of our training, is like, and even with my own kids, like I told them when we had our daughter, I was like, we're going to use anatomically correct words. And I made a point of teaching her body parts. Like, you teach the face, right? But then like in the bath, I was like, this is what these are called, because that training for me was so powerful. And I learned so much about how the court system works when sexual assault. And so like, my kids, and then that's backfired sometimes, because one day my daughter walked in on my brother going to the bathroom, and she said, "Oh, you have a penis," and he was super embarrassed. She was like 3 years old, she didn't know, but like he was like, "Get out!" But like but then he told me, "So why did you teach her that?" I go, "Because if somebody tries to make her touch one, I want her to be able to tell me." Like, you know, so. Yeah. I think that's such an important thing too, that they've got to get comfortable with those words, because if they are being harmed or are harmed in the future, they've got to be able to say what happened, and you're already in a traumatic state as it is. So it's just so important that we arm them with whatever we can to protect themselves, or to at least speak up for themselves once something has been committed. So.
Yeah, they need to know those things. And then what, compared to the family life that we had when I was in middle school, like now we talk about sexual harassment, that's part of the curriculum, human trafficking. We also talk about LGBTQ+, stuff like that, that it's also pretty important, because, they hear all this stuff, from other sources, but they don't, they need to hear like what it is, because a lot of kids throw out the word rape a lot. They're like, oh, rape. And I'm like, do you even know what rape is?
Right.
And or do you even know what gay is when you say, oh, that's so gay? So it's just showing them what it is, what they're saying, and putting it in perspective. It makes a huge difference too. So it's not just about the anatomy of the different parts, but it's also, everything that could happen to them. What's sexual harassment? What's rape? What's, human trafficking? What's consent?
Exactly. And even knowing the people around you. I think the LGBTQ part is important because they need to know, like, at that age too, a lot of kids are not out, and they've got to be careful with their words, and then the rape thing too. There's a lot of kids, as we know as teachers, that are being harmed sexually in their home life, and making a rape joke can be really triggering, and so like there's social repercussions when we don't teach our young children the correct words, to teach them the processes of how are things supposed to work and how they're not supposed to work. So I applaud you for loving what you do, because I don't know if I could ever teach sex education. Like, I just
super terrifying, and I'd be scarred, I'm sure of it. You are a gift to to the children you work with, and to your staff, I'm sure. I don't know everything about like your career so far, but I know that you have a bright future, and I know that you're gonna do so much good for these kids, and you're gonna keep doing amazing things. I really appreciate the time, appreciate the work you've been doing, and we just finished an hour and a half. So
yeah, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. I really, this was so engaging. It was so much. I was like, oh, you guys made me think a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff that I forgot about, a while back. Yeah. Like a lot of stuff about, like race and Stockton.
Yeah.
Filipinos. I haven't seen a lot of Filipinos in Sacramento.
Don't sleep on the Filipino. It's awesome. I'm really happy that you had a chance to come and talk to us, even though we pushed it back a little bit.
I know we had a lot of rescheduling with this one, but we made it. Thank you so much for listening to Educators Not Robots. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like our podcast, please subscribe on whatever platform you access your podcasts on, and leave us a review. Whenever we get reviews, it helps boost visibility for our podcast, and so we can draw in more listeners. Thanks again for your support, and we hope that you listen again soon. Thank you so much for listening to Educators Not Robots. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like our podcast, please subscribe on whatever platform you access your podcasts on, and leave us a review. Whenever we get reviews, it helps boost visibility for our podcast, and so we can draw in more listeners. Thanks again for your support, and we hope that you listen again soon.